Hi everyone, I am so excited and delighted, and I rhyme in time because I'm like a 90s child. But basically, I've got Rebecca Jones with me today, and Rebecca Jones is an amazing digital transformation leader and expert, and she is passionate beyond belief about customer success, which I am too. And we're going to be getting more into the detail on that in this episode. Now, Rebecca and I, we met at a Warwick Business School women's networking event many years ago. And we kind of flirted with each other a bit. We were like, I'm very interested in this person. And then it was really actually over the pandemic that we made that huge commitment to be like, I'm going to make an effort to see you in a pandemic. And then we became really firm friends, and we have a lot of shared interests with the London tech scene. We're often seen at London FinTech events, especially the women FinTech events. That's really fun. Recommend you check them out if you're interested in FinTech and just the tech ecosystem in London as it stands. But Rebecca, can you tell everyone a bit more about yourself?
Yes, with pleasure. Ilona, thank you so much. I'm so flattered and congratulations on season 3 of this podcast. I know people
It's
love.
season 4, I think. Oh, let me check.
Okay. Well, the latest and greatest. Congratulations.
Let me just check. No, because you've got a good point. I think it's 4.
Let's check.
It's fine because I can edit this.
Okay. Well, how about I do this? Well, Ilona, thank you so much. I am likewise delighted to be here, and congratulations on your newest season of the podcast. I know I love the podcast. In particular, I really liked your episode on storytelling with Simon.
Ooh, yes.
Yeah, and also with the London Writer Salon duo.
Yes, no, Matt and Parol are great. And also, if anyone's interested in sort of honing their writing skills, I thoroughly recommend Writer's Hour. It's a free hour that you can write with other people from all over the world. I've met some amazing people and it's been amazing. So yes, season 4, my friends, we are in it. This is season 4. I know I've lost count too. It's like kind of amazing that we've come this far, but I guess it shows you, and it shows me especially, the power of talking about leadership, and especially leadership in the digital age. I think it's a real point of kind of contention at the moment as we move through this world in a different way, especially post-pandemic. Everything's much more digitalized. Are we being inclusive with our digital technology? Are we, thinking about how to integrate the old? We're going to talk about that in a bit, aren't we? But the old ways of being, they're not necessarily bad. It's just how can we integrate them so we're getting the best out of sort of analog and digital. That's kind of where my passions lie in tandem. But I'd love to start with a little bit about you and kind of like the work that you do at the moment with customer success, because I know it's a massive passion of yours, and we've talked about it at length about in especially the startup world, the challenges of getting customer success right. So I'd love you to share your wisdom on that.
Oh, thank you, Ilona. So in a nutshell, I worked in big corporate financial services industry for 15 years. And then 4 years ago now, I pivoted into the startup. So I went from leading a big team into an individual contributor role as employee number 22 in a FinTech startup. So that was a big shock to the system, and a very thrilling ride, and doing all things digital transformation. And like you said, customer success. But of course, customer success can mean many, many things. And especially when you are in a startup land, you are a butcher, baker, candlestick maker. You have to do everything. So that's, you take the baton from sales, and you do everything from onboarding, implementation, support, success, ongoing, anything they need, the renewals, figuring it out, being the voice of the customer, all of the things, organizations sort of we'll get into it a bit more, but throw everything they can over the fence to customer success. And it's supposed to be, this magical, we have a magic wand apparently to fix everything. But I have the secret sauce. I know how to make it work. And it is something that's passionate of mine. Like, how do you actually get, reduce friction, help that customer achieve their strategic objectives? And they can do that through the products and services that you're offering. And it's really partnering with them. But I'm getting ahead of myself there. That's something I'm very passionate about.
I totally agree with you. And I think the way I always think about it is I used to be a maths teacher, right? And if I gave a kid a calculator, it doesn't mean they can do maths. I think it's very similar when a customer buys a tech product, be that SaaS, be that any other, because I've had a lot of experience in the SaaS world. But if you don't know how to use said calculator or insert product here into your business and really like accelerate your growth, then you're going to not get the value that you wanted out of the product, and ultimately either churn, which is, you know, a bad thing for any customer like experience, but also maybe it is the best product, but if you don't know how to use it and you don't know how it aligns to your business growth, then it's a bit useless.
Well, not, I couldn't agree with you more. And what I will add is that oftentimes I will see that the transformation team or the team that we, sold to and worked through the journey mapping and the implementation is rarely actually the end user,
Yeah.
and is really the people that take that product forward. And so there's oftentimes, a delay or even a resistance to usage. And so then when it's time to, if there hasn't been that, what I would call, you can either call it intervention or support or coaching, cheerleading, etc. Then as that renewal approaches, then it's like they've sort of lost the will and even the like institutional legacy knowledge around, why did we do this in the first place? And then they either feel like they're stuck with it and sort of resentful and then don't really use it, or they think like, this is a chunky item on my P&L, like I might as well, and it's just a cost.
Yeah.
So it's like, so there is some aspect of it that it's, one part you do want to keep your eyes on the commercial aspect, but most importantly, you want that customer to be happy, especially and because the product is there to solve one of their problems. So keep that really focused and also understand like how that problem evolves. So we've solved this problem. How can we kind of stretch it? What's next? How, what support do I have available? And if not in this product suite, can I introduce them to a peer that might have a similar struggle? And that's another way of conveying value. That's another aspect of customer success, I think.
Oh, I love that, because now you're getting into community. And I actually think community is a big, massive value add with customer success. If you can build that community right, they become your advocates, they become your cheerleaders, they love the product more than you. They can also feed back into the product and make it better, because they're like, oh, if you did this and this part and hit this place, I've seen it do amazing things. But how do you build that great community? Because that is kind of like an aspect of digital leadership that I've just kind of thought of here on the call. But like, I think that's actually a big part. Like, you're leading a group of people to understand and use your product better. So how have you done that in the past?
So I've seen it done well and I've seen it done not well.
Always. That's like leadership in a nutshell, I think.
I think it's going to be a little bit different if it's B2B from B2C, right? So if it's B2C, I've seen, B2C, they really like to jump in a Slack community or be part of webinars, or, have kind of drop in office hours. That can be kind of fun because it's low risk. No one's coming there to be for a hard sell, and they know that other peers will be there. And then we do an intro, and I even say like, drop your LinkedIn, URL in the chat, and so they can even pick up and have those one-to-one side conversations. It's about that intro. And also I think community, even on, a Slack board or a circle group, whatever you want to do, is on the one hand, it can be what I've heard from my support teams is like, oh no, it's just another channel for support. And I'm saying, but it's another channel for support. That means like it's another source of customer feedback. It doesn't necessarily like, let's turn it on its head a little bit. So I think that sometimes the ambition is exactly what we're talking about, like that introduction, helping them through peer, championing the product, and they can hear how others are using it. On the other hand, there is that, risk or opportunity for it to be more of a support thing, or to have kind of like the air, almost people saying, yeah, I really wish there was a blue button here too. And it becomes like, no, we're not, no,
we're not doing that. Yeah.
all this value, it doesn't need a blue button. So it's a little bit risky. So I think that also why do I say all of that? Because it really is about having that community management. I think what I've also seen is sometimes there's a temptation, whether it's by marketing, customer success, that the idea is great. Like, let's put together a Slack channel or community for this and run a webinar and this and that. But who's actually the owner? And so do you have a dedicated community manager? So if I'm a small startup and I have a set budget, it's going to be hard for me to justify that community manager unless I really understand the purpose, how I'm going to use the data coming through, et cetera. So Great idea. How does it happen in practice? I still think there's that's something you and I should solve together.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I'd love to take the a step kind of higher in a sense from that customer success focus to like thinking about the customer journey. Because to me, I feel like as a leader in customer success, right, and thinking about that, creating that value for customers, being able to have that vision of the entire customer
Yeah.
journey is a really important thing to be able to do and then communicate to your organization about why that red thread needs to go through your whole organization. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you have done that in the past and kind of the things you're thinking about now with that customer journey?
I would love to. This is my passion project, so you're going to have to stop me. I could go on and on. So I couldn't agree with you more. And what I'm talking about now is I call it the customer alchemy, and the
Which I
customer.
love, by the way. That
Yeah.
I think is beautiful because it kind of lends itself to what you were just talking about, how it's like a special sauce, like the
Yeah.
customer community manager. It's not like it's an art. It's an art and a science. You've got to have both. And that alchemy, I think, encapsulates that perfectly.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. So it'll be my site that
Hashtag
I'm.
trademark.
No, it is. It's customeralchemy.co. So sign up on the wait list. So essentially, if you were to ask, like, let's take a startup example, a startup founder, and you ask, what's your customer journey? It would sound something along the lines of there's a salesperson that sells them the product, and then
And
we
then
hand it
flings
over
it at them.
to you. You hope they catch it, plug it in themselves. And then they start using it. And so once sales is done and that contract is signed and the money's coming in, then it goes over to customer success, customer support. And then the founder would likely say, and anything that comes up, like customer support just figures out. But of course, this is unfortunately a bit too simplistic. And that's why what happens is by the time they realize they need either more resource on customer success or customer support, that customer is leaving. And they're usually leaving not because there isn't a friendly customer success person, but rather it's not clear who they should contact at the organization because they had such a good experience with a salesperson, but am I supposed to contact them? And I contact support, but they can only help me with a ticket, but I have this other question that I need that this Loom video isn't helping me with. So like who do I go to? And now they want a QBR and they want me to re-sign the contract. So it can be really confusing. And again, I don't know that that's necessarily um, the fault of the founder. Is that the fault of the founder? Is the fault of the customer? Like there's just an opportunity to do better. So
Yeah.
through the customer mapping, it needs to be something like asking the founder or the head of whoever to say, you wear the hat of the customer. Take me through the journey from the very first time they see your marketing and what's the experience. And literally, whether it's old school with paper post-it notes on a wall or in Miro, virtually is putting those swim lanes together. So, okay, this is marketing, sales, customer success, customer support, product. We'll come on to product in a moment. And then each of those touch points, marketing, where they saw it on Product Hunt, and then they had a demo, and then they with sales, what information do they get after they sold? What does the onboarding look like? What does the implementation look like? What's the engagement look like? What's da, 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 da. So, and also most importantly, what are those data points that you're getting at each point in time? So specifically, one thing that really annoys customers is having to repeat themselves.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Oh God, I've
So
had
annoying.
people almost like turn the camera, like turn the call off, and I get it. And for me, I've had this before in startups, and all I've done is documented what was said on the call. That's all I've done. That's all I've done. I just typed it down when I've been working with clients, just documented what we agreed, shared it around, basic principles, and it calms everyone down and they feel they've been listened to and they don't get cross because they know everybody knows that information. And I think sometimes the speed at which startups can run at, which is amazing, and that's why you join them. But I think that documentation process can change the game just to really help people feel heard. Continue, sorry. I just thought
No,
I'd add that in.
completely. And I think to that as well as I want to add, so you're looking at your process and you of course want to be clever about it. So what are those touch points, what does that customer engagement look like at each point, and what data is being captured, but most importantly, what are we doing with this data?
Mm.
What's the data hygiene? So is it that you want everything in the CRM system? Okay, so does everyone in the organization know how to use it, have access to it? What's the standard? Or sometimes I've seen startups get a bit too clever and they'll say, we'll build a Notion, we'll do the CRM and we'll have a Notion database and we'll have it here and we'll get it in the Airtable and that's very nice and very clever. But at the end of the day, like, can everyone in your organization, if you were to, fling a Slack message and say, okay, tell me what the status is with, you know, um, the HSBC, would everyone know where to look for it? Or does
Yeah,
each department go to a different area? And so I think that it's also, don't over engineer it, you know, putting it in a simple format is not a bad idea, because ultimately your friends or your customer HSBC doesn't want to have to repeat themselves each time as who are
yeah,
the stakeholders, what is the purpose, etc. Does that make sense? We've gone a little bit
absolutely.
down the rabbit hole.
Well, I mean, it's the detail, isn't it? But it's really useful, because I have to say, one of the clients I worked with, it was an insurtech client, and we just used a Google Doc, but it
Yeah.
changed everything. It changed everything with that client. Everyone was on board. Everybody who was talking to that client knew exactly what the status was, what the latest update was, and it was just a Google Doc that was just kept up to date.
Yes.
And it was just, like you say, it can be very simple. Don't over engineer it. You don't have to implement all the wizard things in the world. Just be very clear with your communication. And as you said, think of the customer. What is the customer experience? How would you feel if you've repeated yourself 4 times on a call
Of
and you just
course.
want to get your work done?
Of course. Course. Of course. And but this is an interesting point with enterprise customers, especially that B2B enterprise customers, is, when you're working at a startup, or, you're more of a digital native, you have to remember you need to meet your audience where they're at and where their organization is at. So yes, they've come to you for digital transformation, for a new product, to sort of drag them almost kicking and screaming sometimes into the modern era. But it could be that the person who's buying the product actually had their child program their smartphone. And it could be that they also, because of organizational risk policies, they don't have access to Notion. They can't integrate with your Slack. They can't, and so something like a Google Doc, even though there might be some kind of eye rolls and isn't that old fashioned, well, it works. Ultimately, it works, and your customer's happy. And it, like, what is the problem? Again, how what is the problem we're solving for? And if you're okay with like an MVP and learning and iterating, why is it not acceptable for you to have a sort of like MVP with your customer in terms of communication, and just starting with
Yeah,
a Google Doc and like start bare bones? So if you can start bare bones with a product, why not start bare bones? It doesn't have to be this like super singing, dancing thing. Because for instance, in a couple of my enterprise customer engagements, we would try to use a microsite, and we thought it was so clever putting all of the meeting recordings on there and all of the different artifacts. But ultimately, because of their own internal restrictions, they couldn't watch video or download it,
yeah, yeah.
upload it. They weren't allowed to, co-collaborate on a Monday board. And okay, so then are you going to say no to that enterprise customer because you're not making it like easy enough for them to do business with you? Well, that's on you.
Yeah, no, and I think you come, like, this is a really important point in terms of digital leadership, because this is what I would call digital intelligence. It's being able to think about using your emotional intelligence to communicate using digital tools, and understanding the way that someone might be feeling, like, about that digital experience. Like you're saying, it's like, is it really necessary to do a microsite? Could you not do this in another way? What are the barriers here? Like, there's a level of emotional intelligence I feel needs to come into the digital world, and that's kind of something I'm thinking about a lot. And it's this idea of digital intelligence. It's the way you communicate, utilize the tools, think about the experience online. Because if we're all in a more remote and hybrid working world, that's something we all need to cultivate more of.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, for
So let's
sure.
talk a little bit about you.
Let
Who is a leader who influenced and inspired you?
Yeah, I think um I've been reflecting on this a little bit, and it's actually two of the leaders I had very early in my career, in the early knots, as we would say, the naughties.
Gosh,
And
I can't believe that was 22 years ago. Uh,
but in the naughties, um, they were both female leaders, and this is important because I was working in financial services where there wasn't, there still isn't now, but back then especially, not a huge number. And what I liked is that even as a junior, they gave me big responsibility. They set big expectations for me and gave me the room to fail. So now we popularly call this, it's in vogue to say, like, do you provide psychological safety? Not just in vogue, it's an important principle, but you know what I mean.
yeah,
Before we didn't even use that vernacular. And so when there was a gap between, expectation and performance, we would talk about it then and there. I was never sort of waiting for or had any surprises in a, mid-year review, something like that. So if to summarize, it was, give me big opportunities early,
yeah,
give me feedback early and often, and give me that room and safety to fail. And that's how I really learned. And I think that's a lot of trust, especially to give junior employees, sending me off to big conferences. Even then it was more of like it was such a little, seemed like such a big benefit to have remote working. And
mm,
there they were like, okay, here's your laptop. You can do it 2 days a month. And there were already rails in place. And so it was such a shock to the system to go to another organization where they're like, no, you have to earn the right to be a remote worker. You have to, and then having that other side of the spectrum of being micromanaged and not having that same opportunity or ability to fail. Because ultimately, and something you and I have talked about as well, that even though we work for these amazing organizations and it does set the pace and it is really high, some of them do it well, like I experienced and just explained, where you can, have that room to fail. But there are other places there's zero room for error. There's zero
yeah.
room for mistakes, and that becomes very toxic and very sour very fast.
Very fast, yeah. And I think what you've described there are sort of the ideal leadership behaviors that we would love to see in all of our leaders and managers. That trust is huge, right? So think about trust. And if anyone listening, just go to Google and type in trust equation, and that will show you kind of how to think about building trust. I mean, essentially, do what you're going to say and do it without an agenda, and believe in someone. It's kind of like those principles, but it's quite interesting how often, if you don't trust someone, like you said, if in the second example where they're like, you have to earn the right to work remotely, there's no trust, and so you don't
Right.
trust them, right? So it's a very difficult thing.
Yeah.
And the trust is two ways. They trust you to give it a go and give it a really good go. So even if it's not quite where it should be, they know you're going to learn from it and go to the next level. But also you trust them to have your back if it doesn't quite work, and that you're going to fail forward, but also that they're there to support you. It really is an interesting, that particular aspect of leadership, trust, I think is fundamental. I wonder, could we explore a little bit about how do you build that trust then in a remote working world? So you're a leader, you're working for a startup, it's a remote first company. How do you build trust remotely?
Yeah, I think it's communication, communication, communication. No, but it's really about, this is the expectation. And uh so and here's why I have that expectation, and does that work for you? So what do I mean by that? What I've seen done really well is have maybe a company say, okay, our core hours are 10 to 3, so I need to be able to get a hold of you at Slack, WhatsApp, whatever, between those hours. Or we have meetings during those hours. But otherwise, I'm not going to be checking your status. I don't care. Here's what your deliverables are. Make sure you get them done. We need to have the 10 to 3 for the continuity across the organization. But otherwise, like, have at it and then live up to that. So you can't say this is what we're doing, but then be, checking it at 8:01 and checking in again at 5:01 to see, are they there, are they not, that sort of thing. I think also it's about having those check-ins with people as a human being.
Mm,
I think that is a good amount of trust, just to say, like, this is a no work talk zone. How are you doing? I think that builds a lot of trust. What do you think? Or do you think that's too to
No,
pursue?
I was just thinking about the no work connections. So I've worked, I've obviously been a consultant now for a while and working in different organizations, especially startups. And I think the startups where I've seen the culture excel has been the ones where they have those non-work touch points. They're not necessarily laborious, but they are there to keep people connected and build a remote working culture that's quite powerful. I think if you don't design these things, because it has to be intentional because of the remote work structure, you can get a very poor culture develop, and people don't trust each other. So I think there is a lot more to be done in that space. I think designing remote cultures could be a new consultancy avenue for people, for sure. As we realize what works well and what doesn't, because it requires someone to facilitate that. A bit like what you were saying with a community manager with a customer success. If you don't have anybody doing that, sure, it might work. There might be that golden moment where everything combines perfectly, but you're more likely to succeed if you've got a community manager in that role helping you build it.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And I think for me, the trust bit really digs into like my first questions are, why wouldn't you trust the people that you're hiring or work with? So what does
Yeah.
that tell me about the organization? And for me, it usually boils down to one of two things. So one, it's either it's people in the organization don't feel like there's enough transparency or visibility about what's going on. So
Mm-hmm.
that's telling me that maybe communications are not good in some way. Like, are we not, distributing that information to the people that need it when they need it? And it's also about, is it that the expectations are changing so quickly that you have to just be in this constant state of responsiveness, reactive, which is not great.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I do think it's a big challenge for companies as we go forward, for sure. I'd love to know a little bit more about, your own leadership development journey. So could you tell me something about, your own leadership development journey that kind of helped you become the leader you are today?
Yes, absolutely. So without
It's usually something went wrong, and I learned a lot from it. Yeah,
yes,
this is the what?
yes, spoiler alert.
What did you learn?
Spoiler alert is that. I think it's two things. So one is, yes, it's that pivoting from, going from a big team leadership role and then to a startup role and having sort of a master class in what not to do as a
Mhm.
leader, and also a good like reflective practice on what has happened over time for me. But I think as well, being a leader, I've had the opportunity, whether it was at a big company or at a startup, to build teams from scratch several times. And so each time I iterate and I realize I have that opportunity to show up again in a new and better way for my people. And so I'm have a lot of gratitude for that. So I'd like to talk about those kind of separately, if that's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So versus that, um,
No, you must integrate them together in a combined story. No, it's fine.
well, it's your show. It's your show. Um, so sorry. So basically, when you work at a startup, you basically have to, and I mean that from like pre-seed to maybe like Series
Yeah,
B, generally, is that you have to accept that you're working for a new company every 90 days.
yeah. That's a
Therefore,
good point. That's a really good point. That's one of the quotes that I'm going to pull out. Yeah.
yes. So therefore, what I like to do is, so in terms of leadership for startups, I think that there's value in having kind of like a team sprint every 90 days.
Hmm.
So that's whether either it's your micro team in that division or whether it's the startup itself. And I think that it's very good to have the vision and the purpose and the values. And yes, that shouldn't go away. But I think in terms of my own leadership style, that it's, yes, I need to put the guardrails in place to know that no matter how many times we go through that 90 days cycle, yes, we'll have the weekly check-ins, yes, we'll have performance, but but as a leader, being really honest with my team to say, okay, this is what we're needing to accomplish in the next 90 days. This is the expectation for how it's going to go. It may have to be adjusted and it may not look the same for the next 90 days. So can you come along this journey with me and, do it in this collaborative way? To see if we can get there. And then we're really going to talk about like what worked and what didn't work. And for me, what is underneath all of that is just that vulnerability and honesty.
Mm.
Just because I've also seen that in startups that, there's a feeling of things are too unstable because of this is my conclusion, the 90-day cycle. So they try to inject senior leaders, and the senior leaders want to come in and say, well, this is how it worked at this organization that was so successful for so long. And that kind of more heavy-handed approach, which they call process, or they say structure, but it's not something you can necessarily helicopter in and apply. It just
Mm.
doesn't work that way with startups. Yes, startups need those, it's almost like they need it from the ground up rather than from the top down. So that's one of my bigger leadership lessons. And so that, again, with my teams and as I've built them up, so again, going from butcher, baker, candlestick maker, doing everything, and as I'm hiring people to say, okay, I know that what it says on the tin that you're an account manager, but actually I'm going to need you to also be a little bit of onboarding, a little bit of implementation, a little bit of this. Like, can you go with me on this? Because we can't, though there's this pressure and desire for there to be strict OKRs, kind of with startups, it's like, then you need new OKRs every 90 days. Because
Yeah.
it's hard to say, I don't know. Am I making sense?
Yeah, no, I think especially just thinking about startups in those terms, like it's every 90 days. And I think, what you're saying about, I've seen this happen in startups. They get a certain round of funding, then they go and hire all these amazing like people who are amazing, like don't
Yeah,
get me wrong,
without
but
question.
it's then kind of implementation of something from above. And
Yes.
it's then, in a sense, it becomes positional leadership. So I've been reading a lot about leadership. What a surprise. I've been
Surprise.
reading a
Very on
spoiler.
brand.
Yeah,
Very
yeah,
on brand.
right. Like, and it was servant leadership versus positional leadership. So positional leadership is where it's your title, it's your job role, it's your job title. Servant leadership is that you're serving your team to empower them to be able to achieve the mission that you're trying to get to, be
Yeah.
that, OKRs, whatever it is. And that makes me realize what you've just said, putting that together, is by actually hiring these senior people, then you're actually putting positional leadership as more important than servant leadership. And actually, this is where you get a breakdown in a lot of the leadership I see in startups, because they're not finding a way to bridge that gap, because it's coming top down, and then everyone's trying to. Then the reason this is important is because positional leadership means that everybody underneath that leader is then looking at that leader, trying to guess what that leader wants, rather than being empowered enough to do the right thing and to do the best thing by the customer, or the best thing by the organization. And when I put those things together, I was like, this is why this is not working. So you're absolutely right. You need to develop from the ground up, still have that direction. I think the direction is key, but you need to bridge the gap between the two with a layer of leadership development. That's what I'm seeing kind of play out with the clients I'm working with, and kind of where my thinking is going with my leadership development consulting and stuff.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And if I may add to that, two things. One is you need everyone on the team to understand why those leaders are needed, what they're going to be bringing, what they're going to be doing, and how they interact with you. So if there's a decision that positional leadership needs to happen, then everyone needs to be brought along as well on that story as to
Yeah.
why. And so that's one. And then I think the second is that's also showing people that there may not be opportunities or growth for them over time
Yeah.
in that organization. So I do think that's, that may be an exit trigger for some of the talent.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing to raise. And I also think that leader needs to be very clear and communicate the vision repeatedly. So I've seen this as well with startups. They're not communicating the vision to their people internally enough. They know what's going, the senior leaders know it's in their heads every day. They're not communicating it and reiterating it and doing that storytelling. The podcast episode you love, the storytelling is key with leadership development. It's really important for every leader to tell the story really well.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. We've just solved all the world's problems here.
Who
I think
knew?
with the positional leadership as well, especially with this concept of the startup is different every 90 days when they
Yeah,
do come in and want to put down these really, under the guise of like process or structure the thing is you're already creating an exception to that process from day dot because
yeah,
it just doesn't it's too heavy. It's
yeah.
too yeah.
Totally agree with you. I'd love to move into the project that you're working on at the moment. Like, I'm going to talk about the name because
Yeah.
just before we started recording, we were talking about the name. But this project is about hire and old, and it's kind of related to what we're talking about here, where you actually get the expertise of someone who's brilliant and amazing, and they come into your organization as a startup, and you're bringing that in. But you've been thinking more about this, and this is your startup idea in effect, and you've been building it in public. I'd love you to share with everyone kind of what's been happening with this idea.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So it's something I launched called Hire and Old. And why is it called Hire and Old? What does that actually mean? So during lockdown, I downloaded TikTok. And on TikTok, to my great horror, I found out that anyone over sort of age 21 was considered an old. So hashtag an old. And also, and also they would call like areas of
Sorry,
TikTok.
listeners.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
majority of my
sorry.
listeners are older than that. So
Yeah, exactly. And so there's also like hashtag old talk, they would call it. So I was laughing about that because, of course, I love TikTok and very shockingly, I know, over the age of 21. And so I was toying with this idea because I love technology. I, did a, mid-career pivot to technology. But what I found actually when I tried to leave big a large financial institutions to go to a fintech startup, I faced a huge amount of resistance. And it wasn't necessarily because of my exact age, but it was more like, oh, well, no, we actually want someone with this like very precise experience, or we need someone who's more flexible, or they'd use all of these sort of, words to mean we don't think that you have for me it just exhibited a lot of closed-mindedness around talent. And the thing is, spoiler alert, every company is a tech company, whether they like it or not.
yeah,
So they need to be able to have talent at all different ages, all different backgrounds, all different everything.
yeah,
So for me it was just such a frustration that I had to go through so many interviews to basically say like I've left this like comfortable, known, very structured, stable environment, stable-ish, for like the absolute chaos and uncertainty of startup life. Like, and I'm willing to do any of these number of things, but you're saying I'm excluded because I'm too experienced or have too much this or too much that, when actually I'm bringing in a lot of just life experience that could help others. And the other thing I found very ironic and actually, if I may, hypocritical, is that there was like, yeah, we'll hire people out of uni with no, life experience. And, we're not talking about salary here. We're not talking about pay here, really. We're talking about, why is it that you can bring in someone who doesn't actually have any experience in tech and say, we'll, as long as they're bright and curious and, well, I'm bright and curious. Like,
yeah. I
why is
think
that
that's
so
a really
different?
good point. Yeah, because everyone assumes when you get old, you're not bright and curious, and it's like, no, I'm really curious.
Or
I'm
that,
more curious now.
or that I won't work as hard, but
Yeah,
what does it actually mean? Is it FaceTime? So this is why I continually challenge, what do you actually mean that young, quote unquote, younger workers will work, quote unquote, harder? Like, what does that actually mean? And what proof do you have? Like, so anyways, all this to say, I decided I wanted to try to open up this conversation. And so I called it Hire and Old because I thought it was very clever and fun. And the logo is an owl, which is very cute and wonderful. And I've also wanted to do a build in public, which is, be very vulnerable, the idea out there. And my starting point was I want to open the conversation because I want to understand, is it that we need to educate? Is it an issue on the HR side? Like maybe they don't have the remit or the flexibility to hire. Can we open minds about that? Is it that people at startups are uncomfortable with having people of a different, biological age report to them? Like, is it the
yeah,
power dynamic? Like, what
yeah,
is it? I need to find out a bit more. So this has been an interesting exercise because, and it is kind of product market fit, is first of all, I'm having to spend too much time explaining what the name means.
yeah.
So even if I think it's clever and fun, apparently not everyone thinks it's as clever and fun as I do. And I've also gotten some feedback that this old, like people are getting stuck on the old, because really it's, again, my point isn't really about the age. It kind of is, but it kind of isn't. But it's more around like, be more open-minded about transferable skills and less
Yeah.
precious about it being from years of experience or industry specific or whatever. If really what you're saying is we want curious, hardworking, you know, people, then why does it need to, why are you putting limitations on yourself? And I would even advance to you that I think this is part of the reason that 90% of startups fail, is because they do get too precious and bogged down into these. They think it's a very specific formula of talent should look like this and skills should look like that and this, that, and the other. And I'm saying, like, if there's already a high risk that your startup's going to fail, why not hire someone with a bit more life experience to come in and do something, fun and move fast and break things? Like,
Yeah,
why
and
not?
we were talking about this before as well. Like the average tenure in a startup or scale up is 14 months. So
Right.
if and I think you have to be very clear about the skill sets that you've got, because I think we've definitely come across instances where they've put someone in too soon, the company wasn't quite ready. If you think about that 90-day cycle, you get that wrong 90 days and you've put in like the former CEO of like, I don't
Yes.
know, the former CEO of like Barclays into the startup that's only like at seed A. That's not going to quite work. But actually, if you think about the skills that you might need and then put it in the right place, which is kind of what I know you're working on as well, like looking at putting people temporarily in positions to grow the team within. It's like that
That's
kind of alchemy thing.
yes, yes, exactly. Well, going to so I have the customer alchemy thing, but part of me is like, it's all team alchemy as well, because so two things. One, I just left a startup, and part of the reason for the leaving was that they hired a big role too soon. So bringing me
Yeah.
in as head of customer success, and when they didn't really have the customer base yet, they didn't have the firm idea of what customer success would mean. How should it really be measured? What would the value be to the customer? How would they hadn't really prepped the other teams, sales or marketing, how we would work together. And it just was too much too soon, disorganized. And ultimately that came at a great cost to the organization. It was, squandered resource, and ultimately that fails the customer. So that's a huge bummer. One, but two, just lost what I realize now, and what I think other startups need is what I would call, we've talked about this as well, is almost like an interim team,
Mm.
um, to come in and say, okay, let's do a skills assessment or this for who you have here now. Let's map out that customer journey that we talked about. What's that end-to-end process? Who needs to know what? Is it a matter of we need to spend a month just creating the artifacts, putting the, rolling out roles and responsibilities, and it looks like you need actually two more people on customer support. You actually don't need a head of customer success. And it looks like the person you have in customer success now, in 6 months time, they're probably ready for, there'll be another person on the team. So are you ready to move them into leadership? So why don't we start with their leadership training now? I think that that's a better, especially again, if we go back to overlay it even further on our layer cake of that kind of 90-day cycle, rather than again, this like, let's put on this heavy, like head
Mm.
of here, let's hire 3 people and we haven't really given them a strong remit, but we're saying reduce churn by X. Reduce churn by X, how and
Yeah.
where? And what's the customer journey? And who are my teammates? And who's the adult in the room?
Yeah, it's finding that, but what I'm hearing is it's finding that balance between that experience and seniority, and like injecting it in and giving everyone that wisdom and empowerment, but not like crushing it. It's just kind of almost like a boost, like here's all the information, I'm going to help you, we're going to get to the next level, and then you're going to be all right and I'm going to go on to the next thing. Because I think as well that kind of lends itself to the way that work is changing. I think,
Yes.
I mean, nobody would say in 2022, I would argue, you're in the same job until the end of time, like the same company. No, no, no. We know that now. So we also need to think about, interim roles. There's not that many at the moment, but I think they're going to become more common. I think interim, specific targeted injections of different accelerated processes, I think that could be a real thing.
And I think also a natural adjacency is rise of the generalist.
Yeah,
Have more generalists in your organization to, you know, work cross-functionally. So I think we're even still kind of grappling, kind of stumbling around looking
yeah.
for the right like label to put on the tin for it. But I think there's a lot of value in the generalist space. So even when I think about customer success, I think if I'm looking ahead, I think that, you know, there right now it's like now there's even a more finite differentiation between, you know, customer onboarding, implementation, technical da, 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 da. And I think we're going to swing back the other way, which is like I don't know that we need all these differentiated roles.
Yeah, no, no,
I think
I
some of those
agree.
pieces actually now should maybe belong to engineering and product because they're more technical da, da, da. Some of this actually should be more sales, and I think there's more like sales, marketing, customer success, the holy trinity there, being better aligned, because a lot of those artifacts are the same, and also it's all voice of the customer stuff. So I think there's just a lot like a customer generalist
Yeah.
idea. So again, with that customer alchemy, that's something I want to think about. But circling all the way back to hire and old, I'm gonna have to change the name. I still have a few more conversations to go, but I think it needs to be, oh gosh, I don't even know. Hire and old. Um,
Well, if
hmm,
anyone's got any suggestions,
yeah.
reach out to Rebecca on LinkedIn. That her link will be below, and just sort of come up with some suggestions. She may have even iterated by the time you will hear it, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But I think it's a great thing that you're doing, like building in public, and I think it shows, that kind of that skill that we need as leaders for the digital age of almost like getting that feedback, iterating, and also not being too precious about if something doesn't quite work, you need to move forward because
Yes.
it's not you trying to bulldoze that name into existence is probably not going to be as beneficial as getting the feedback and iterating. So I think
Yeah.
that's a different skill set. Whereas I think, if you think 50 years ago, they would have said, get a name and puncture the market with it and keep saying it until everybody knows it. And
Everybody knows it, right?
yeah.
Right. I still
Um,
try to figure out how to keep the owl logo.
Yeah, because we like cute owls on things. On all the merch with owls on it.
Right. Right.
Fantastic. So my final question for you today is, what are the 3 top tips for leaders kind of for the digital age in your field of experience, with tech and customer success, etc. So what are your 3 top tips for leaders today?
I think the first is learn how to say no to the customer. Yeah.
Mm.
So why do I say that? So there are lots of different ways. So yes, there's the no, and but um, there's also the temptation by startups to be so responsive and to cling so tightly to the customers that one, you're not really finding, you're delaying finding that product market fit or the right customer base for you. Two, it's not helping you get really, really clear on the product and your ideal, customer avatar or persona. And there's lots of ways to have that conversation around, hey, is there a workaround we can do? How else can we support that? Because sometimes that request and what they're asking for is again there it's usually a proxy for something else. So
Mm.
that leads me to my second one, which is learning how to have more and I think this is true especially in customer success, and especially as we move in more emphasis and rightly so on voice of the customer, is being your customer advocate. And the best way to advocate on behalf of your customer is to have the courage to have those challenging conversation, and not coming from a place of I can't risk them leaving this relationship, but coming from a place of like, I can't risk them not having this conversation and helping them achieve their goal. I think that's a very different
Yeah.
mindset and sets a very different tone for that conversation.
Yeah. And your third tip?
And my third tip is um, customer success is part of everyone's role, and
Mhm.
OKR, it doesn't just sit within customer success. So I think that very closely tied to voice of customer is the saying, okay, product, sales, engineering, everyone, we all have jobs because we have customers.
Yeah.
And it's important we understand, what are we solving for the customer? What friction is being removed? What problems are they trying to solve? Where are they going for? So all of us have responsibility for churn, not just customer success. Because again, very neatly coming back to the very start of our conversation, when customers churn, it's not because they don't have a friendly face to call to. It's because there's been some sort of failure in product or engagement or education. They're not sure how to use it, or they don't really understand why there was a change in pricing, or they're not even sure, like, why do I have 4 different contacts? Why do I have to keep repeating myself? Like, there are other ways. So everyone has that ownership. So yes, that, customer success, or whether it's the CRO or whomever, has that overall vision. And again, that pure customer experience, that pure customer journey view. But ultimately, each person in the organization has a responsibility for, and should have a tied for a churn OKR.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. It's almost like that servant leadership, that kind of shared responsibility to kind of make sure that the customer is being cared for, and getting what they need from you.
I have a bonus one, but
Oh,
this isn't necessarily like industry specific, which is, I think, there's a lot of value in what I call I know people are calling it quiet quitting, but I would say quiet complimenting, and also quiet wellness. So that can show up as just telling people they're doing a good job, or if they speak up at a meeting or they bring forward an idea, let's maybe balance out some of this like emoji party that happens, or like giving people a high five in a Slack start channel. That's fine, but I think there's also a lot of like beauty and simplicity in just sending someone a DM to say, like, really enjoyed your comment today in the meeting, or I know you've really been working hard on this project, like, well done on that. So it's not, it's not tied to any specific meeting, catch up, whatever, but just like letting people know that they're seen, letting people know that you do acknowledge that they're making a contribution, especially if you're in an organization that moves really fast. And it's also things like, if you know that everyone's going back to back Zoom meetings, why don't you suggest having a video off meeting? Let me tell you, everyone will love you and they'll love that meeting. Or to say, we're going to go, the first 10 minutes of this meeting are video off, and we're also going to do a 2-minute breathing.
yeah.
Or everyone just jump, like little children, like, let's stand up out of your chair and get all the wiggles out and then start. And just try it once. Anyone listening, I invite you to try that in your next meeting, and you'll see like just how refreshing it is. It sounds kind of naff, but it actually is really effective.
Yeah, and I mean, this perfectly illustrates my point that I'm so passionate about this digital intelligence, right? Think about the ways you use the digital tools and how it can help be better leadership experience for all, right? Like you said, I think we can forget, especially working remotely, to share positive feedback. We're almost like, oh, because in the office you would have done it instinctively, or even your eyes, you would have locked eyes and sort of given a little nod, and that would have been enough. But we don't have that because we're all remote. So you have to be more intentional and more communicative. I think that's that digital intelligence piece.
Yes. And I mean, are you going to remember that someone, for me, that's nice that I'm getting like accumulating number of high fives my Slack channel, but I'm not really remembering that. I'm remembering that someone reached out on a DM, or, at the beginning, as people are coming into a call, just being like, hey, that was such a great idea. Or I saw you finally, like, I saw that deck you produced. That must have taken you a long time.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think that's great advice for everyone listening. Well, I hope you've all enjoyed listening. I've enjoyed talking to Rebecca. It's been an absolute joy and pleasure, and I'm lucky enough to get to speak to Rebecca more often, so I'm the lucky one. You get to repeat this episode if you want to hear more of Rebecca. And also, Rebecca, all of your links to all your projects that you'll be doing will be down below. How can people get in touch with you? I guess LinkedIn is a great space.
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best way. Right now on Twitter, I am on Hire and Old, but of course that may change. And yeah, all the links should be around. But yeah, LinkedIn is the best place.
Yeah, and Customer Alchemy, people can sign up and find out more.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
perfect. Awesome. All the links will be below.
Right.
Please reach out to Rebecca.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she will be in contact with you, and keep your eyes peeled for the name change, and also suggest anything that you think might be worthwhile as well. Thanks, Rebecca, for sharing your wisdom with us, and for sharing your leadership for the digital age perspective with customer success, and wish you all the success for you in the future.
Thank you, Ilona, and keep up the great work.
Thank you. Bye.